Let's go ahead and get started, and we'll read first 3 verses. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So here, the book of Olives, the Olivet Discourse, it takes off. There are 3 questions that the disciples asked the Lord Jesus Christ, and from here, he begins the discourse based upon the 3 questions that they ask. When shall these things be? Number 1, what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Maybe the last 2 are 1 question, but they seem to be 2 to me. So having just departed from the temple, which was Jesus' standard operating procedure, it says in Luke chapter 21:37, and in the daytime he was teaching in the temple, and at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. So while he was in Jerusalem, that was his life. He would go in the temple and preach. Opportunities were given in those days to do so. And then he goes up to the Mount of Olives, and having said to them, either on a trip back or while they were still there, everything you see here, not one stone will be left upon another. It's all going to be tossed down. And in their minds, they would be thinking just like you and I would be. You know, if we were to see, Washington, D.C., and Jesus were to say, see that Capitol building over here, see the White House, see these monuments to Jefferson, not one stone is going to be left upon another, what are we going to think? Well, it must be the end of the world as we know it, Teotihuacan, right? So that's their assertion, their assumption. This is the heart of Judaism, the temple and the temple complex. And if it's all going to be destroyed, what must be the end of it all? Instead, Jesus said, beginning in verse 4, take heed that, Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. You shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, see that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and there shall be famines. Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. So it would seem that Jesus is saying, look, earthquakes, wars, cold wars, that's just standard the way it's going to be for the next 2,000 years until I return. That is not a sign that the end is upon us. So before we split this up, we're going to look at some signs of the end times and why what Jesus is telling us is very pertinent to the day in which we're in. First, let's give an outline, an understanding of the Olivet Discourse. Now, if you were to take your Bible, in all 4 accounts, the crime that Jesus was allegedly executed for is given in all 4 Gospels, but they're different. In Matthew, it says, this is the King of the Jews. Mark 15:26, the King of the Jews. Luke 23:38, this is the King of the Jews. And in John 19:19, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. There are other people say the Bible contradicts itself. No, it doesn't. They're not disagreeing with each other. They're just not all telling you everything. But you put the 4 together, and when you find out it says, this is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. That's what was over. But you have to put the 4 together to get that. So as you first begin to read this, and many years ago, probably 25 years ago, I was studying different views on prophecy and eschatology, and looking at older interpretations. And I noticed something, or it was pointed out to me, that if you hold on to Matthew 24 and look at Luke chapter 21, Again, we're going to compare the two. Do all that down. All right. So as you look at both passages next to each other, well, at least the first few verses in Matthew 4 through 8, 24, 4 through 8, Luke 21, 8 through 11, it seems to be the same. It seems to talk about the same thing. Nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes, pestilences, and here Luke adds fearful sights and great signs there shall be from heaven. So we seem to be in the same ballpark. But if you continue on and you read in Luke following that, he lays out for us the first prophecy and answers the first question: when shall these things be? The destruction of the temple, AD 70. If you look in the passage in detail, he goes into it. It says, when you see Jerusalem compassed about with armies, then get out of town. These be the days of vengeance. And so as I read the older books, and the assumption of some was that the entire Olivet Discourse is an answer or the prophecy concerning not one stone left upon another, the destruction of the temple. But our Luke and Matthew is saying the same thing. At this point, they seem to be. But at the end of Luke's account, or at the end of Matthew's account, it says, then shall they say. But at the end of Luke's account, it says, before all these. So what you have is Luke is now going before the sorrows and telling you what's going to happen in AD 70. Matthew, on the other hand, is going from the beginning of sorrows, referring to the second destruction of the temple, not the first, or the first as far as in this prophecy is concerned. So they're not really saying the same thing, and so the confusion disappears for me. Now I seem to understand it. It is not all the same thing. I think you understand the view that the destruction of the temple and Olivet Discourse being fulfilled all in the past is the preterist view. And so in order for me to accept the preterist view, or as all fulfilled in AD 70, the writers were saying as lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. This is Matthew 24:27. And wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. And immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened, right? The moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So the preterist view is that happened in AD 70, but not literally. It's prophetic poetry. So I'm like, I had a hard time with that at first, but then I began to accept it until later, as the Olivet Discourse appeared to open up to me just a little bit better. And so now I see that they're not talking about the same thing. It's two separate occurrences. So let's go back now. Look at the things that Jesus pointed out to them. Wars, rumors of wars, right? Nation against nation. As I see here, these are signs or prophetic indicators, which you find out throughout all the New Testament. Jesus here, the Apostle Paul, Peter, Daniel in the Old Testament speaks of things that are yet in the future. And we look at those indicators as someone at WHO, I've forgotten his name now, he always talked about economic indicators. But we look at prophetic indicators that we are close to the return of Jesus. We see the rise of the occult, immorality, travel and knowledge, scoffers, and of course, rebirth of Israel, particularly Jerusalem, which 1967, and then looking at, hopefully soon, the rebuilding of the temple. But also we see the decline of the church. See, the New Testament began in the book of Acts with the decline of Israel and the rise of the church. The New Testament would seem to indicate that the opposite now being reversed, the decline of the church going into apostasy, but apostasy is translated as the falling away. So the Olivet Discourse, Jesus prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. In answer to the question number one, said not one stone left upon another. And so we answered question number one. Now we go to Luke chapter 21 for that. Right, what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? I think he speaks of that in Matthew chapter 24. As I said, realizing that they had probably made a mistake, thinking that the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple must be the end of the world as we know it. Then he gives to us verses 4 through 8, a general course of history of the last 2,000 years. False Christs and false prophets. Check. Wars and cold wars, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, pestilences, earthquakes. Mark chapter 13 verse 6 adds troubles, and Luke 21:11 adds fearful sights and great signs in the heaven. So this is laid out as a general course of history until Jesus returns. However, he adds in verse 8, these are the beginning of sorrows. What is meant by that? The expression sorrows has to do with a woman's birth pangs. And we know this because Isaiah chapter 13 and verse 8. Isaiah 13:8. Isaiah 13:8, and they shall be afraid, pangs and sorrows shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth. They shall be amazed one at another. Their faces shall be as flames. So is this saying a woman about to give birth, their faces as flames? Could be. I've been through this twice, of course, as most of you know. Indirectly, observing my wife. We were there for 2 sons being born. So the sorrows of birth pangs are contractions. The women, as they get closer and closer to the time that they give birth, they start having these contractions, these birth pangs, and they increase more and more as you get to the end. In the beginning, it's not so bad. But as you get closer to the time of giving birth, it gets rough. Right? And so these birth pangs, contractions, they increase with intensity until the baby comes. So then Jesus moves us through the latter times of the gestation period until the age gives birth to Jesus' return, as laid out in verses 27 through 30. So he then concludes in verse 34 with, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all things be fulfilled. We'll have another study as we look at the 2 generations that Jesus refers to. One, which ends with the destruction of the temple, AD 70, and the other that ends with his return at the end of the time of Jacob's trouble. So let's look at the indicators that we are expecting to see in that generation. So the 20th century began with the war to end all wars. Because that's what they called it anyway. World War I, 1914 to 1917, began June 28, 1914. The Austrian Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated while on a state visit to Serbia by a Serbian zealot. The zealot jumped up on the running boards of the car. Cars used to have running boards back in the good old days, and assassinated him. Hostilities broke out between Austria and Serbia. And of course, everybody has to get in on it. Right? Most of the nations of the world chose sides, and it was on. 43 principal nations involved every able-bodied man in combat or to work in munitions factories. The women and children also worked in those factories. It was the end of the stay-at-home law. No, at least for that period of time anyway. It was an incredible thing, but it was bettered by World War II. And then from that we had Korea, Vietnam. We had the Cold War, rumors of wars since as long as I was born in '59. It was going on then up until what, 90? When did that? No, 89. The fall of the Soviet, allegedly the fall of the Soviet Union. Right, 2 Gulf Wars, and now we're headed quick as possible into World War III. It seems. Everybody seems to want it. Everybody but the American people. Just whoever those people are in Washington, they want this war, it would seem. Interestingly, World War II brought about a restructuring of the geopolitical makeup of the world. And Israel was reborn in 1948. It became a nation again. And that would not have happened had it not been for 2 world wars, had it not been for the Holocaust and Adolf Hitler's hatred of Jews, in spite of the fact his mother was Jewish. So I throw that in there for interesting. Famines always follow the ravages of war. Pestilences or life-destroying diseases and plagues usually follow famines. And the world has just been devastated by a, what do you call it, the extended version of the flu called COVID. Right? And so hopefully we're past that, but I doubt that we are. It can always be brought up later when necessary. Earthquakes. They've been around forever. Earthquakes have always happened. They happen at least since the time of the flood. In 2,000 years, the number of earthquakes have doubled every century. We've had, since 1950, they doubled every decade. A seismologist at Scripps Research Center in La Jolla, California, he said it is almost as though the Earth's plates are gyrating in anticipation of the world's greatest earthquake. And how right is he? It's going to be something. The Bible tells us when Jesus returns to Zechariah, his foot is going to stand on the Mount of Olives where he left from, and it's going to split wide open. And he's going to do a urban renewal project on Jerusalem, and it's probably going to look more beautiful when he's finished than it is now. He also tells us there's going to be a rise in religious deception. Verse 5, verse 11, verses 23 through 26. After 200 years of serious persecution against Christianity, in spite of the fact that the Roman Empire considered Christianity a crime because they were accused of burning Rome, and so they lost their jobs. They had to go hide in the mountains and hills, and they were used for entertainment purpose. People liked R-rated entertainment back then, and they brought in people in the Colosseum, and they wanted to see blood, And Christians were easy pickings, feed them to the lions. But the thing is, the more Christians they killed, the more they got. And so Rome was falling from within. The eradication of Christianity was working against him. So, a brilliant monarch arose over the Roman Empire by the name of Constantine, and he brought an end to the persecution of Christians, right, the Edict of Toleration, and then he had a council a few years later, the Council of Nicaea, to determine what are going to be the doctrines of my church, right, and the divinity of Jesus Christ won by one vote. Of those one vote, he maintained his divinity, and immediately the world went into the Dark Ages. Then we had a Reformation in the 16th century. But then in the 19th century, the rise of cults came upon us. Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Science, and some would say the Church of Christ and Seventh-day Adventists. The Church of Christ are Campbellism, and the Seventh-day Adventists, when they talk about obeying the law, there's only one they care about, and that's keeping the Sabbath. Constantly being asked the question, who changed the Sabbath to Sunday? And the answer is nobody. The Sabbath will always be Friday at 6 p.m. to Saturday at 6 p.m. But I have not been commanded to keep the Sabbath. You say, why do you worship on Sunday? Well, just because Jesus rose on that day, right? The first day of the week. You say, don't you know Sunday is named after the sun god? Well, yeah, and Saturday is named after Saturn. So what's the point? The first day of the week, and it doesn't matter. You know, traditionally, it seems in the New Testament, they seem to get together on the first day of the week. It was convenient for them as they would go to a place and they would preach in the synagogue on the Sabbath first. Right? They would go to the Jews, and then when they picked all the Jews in Christianity that would come, and then they would go for the Gentiles. Jew first, Gentiles, right? And so I guess it was convenient just to have it the next day, and considering it's the same day that Jesus rose from the grave, it seemed convenient. So there's no command of any day. You should worship the Lord every day. Right? The Bible says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. He doesn't say when, he just says do it. You know, so we set aside a time for church. Someone says, we don't want to have our church service on Monday, we want to do it on Tuesday. Fine, have it. There's no, I can't tell you not to do it. You know, so sometimes things get in people's heads. Right? The 20th century brought about the what we call it the charismatic movement, and though there might be many good people in all of those little groups, you know, but the idea that Jesus taught a health and wealth gospel, name it and claim it, the word faith movement, and it just exploded, and everybody in Hollywood thought this was the great thing, right? But you know, Jesus said he'd take care of us. He didn't say he would give us everything we want, right? And yes, I believe in divine healing, but Jesus didn't promise I will always heal you. Right? If it gives me glory, I will, right? He didn't say that I want you wealthy. He just said, I'll take care of you. You won't be hungry. You pray for a car. You take whatever the Lord provides for you. If it's a Honda, right, they run 300,000-400,000 miles. Why not? It's fine, you know. Or if he gives you a Cadillac, well, I'm not going to cry about it, you know. I remember Arnie. He inherited this Cadillac, you know, and I had this little Mercury Tracer, which is a Ford Escort with the Mercury badges on it, right? And I got 27 miles a gallon out of that car. And he's talking about his Cadillac. He says, yeah, I get about 24 miles to the gallon. I said, and I'm squeezing in this tin can for 3 miles to the gallon. Anyway, Cadillac's a good car, but I've never had a desire to have one. But the Lord said he's going to take care of our needs. He didn't say he's going to make us healthy, wealthy, but he will make us wise if we stay in the scriptures. The 21st century brought to us the emerging church movement. Having read one of the, teachers of the emerging church, one by the name of Phyllis Tickle, who has since passed on, and I'm not going to, I won't say anything bad about her as a person, but she wrote in her book, the Protestants traded in a human pope for a paper pope. We reject both. Oh. So we've gone way past the Reformation, and now we're tossing out the Bible. Right there, Jim Jones. Seen a film of him preaching. You don't need this book, and he tosses it like that. He says, all you need to hear is what I'm going to tell you. That's when they should have left. Why they stayed around to drink the Kool-Aids, I have no idea. So what they have in this emerging church now, they are moving together New Age teaching, the occult, and the Eastern mystical religions, which I know somewhat about because, you know, the the Beatles were Buddhists. I mean, they're not Buddhists, they were Hindus. So, and that's where I learned about that. So we're here. The Bible talks about the last days, some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. We have arrived. Church is on the decline. It was taking off 3,000 souls the first day. Doesn't quite work that good nowadays. It can. As I said before, I personally hold to the 7 churches as defining the ages of the church age. And we find if that is accurate, Laodicea is an age of apostasy. But before that was the age of Philadelphia. It was the best ever. And what happened in those, that was the day where we had beginning with, I believe, the Great Awakening, the 1740 preaching of George Whitefield in Philadelphia, right, which led to the greatest era of Bible exposition ever. Some of the greatest preachers of all. Well, anyway, so I think that's where we are, the decline of the church. The falling away seems to be upon us. I thought the falling away was going on 5 or 6 years ago, and then COVID, and it seems like things have gotten worse. So I don't know how long that will be. But he also talks about, especially in Luke, more in Luke than Matthew, strange events in the sky. Strange events in the sky. Let's flip over to Luke. And Luke chapter 21. Chapter 21, down to verse 11. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, famines, pestilence, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. And down in verse 25 and 26, and of course, follows 24, the ending of the times of the Gentiles, and then he adds when that's over, and there shall be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking at those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Well, so let me see if I can give a speculation here. We see eclipses, they happen all the time. Well, not all the time, but pretty regularly, right? And blood moons, a lot of talk about blood moons, and they're normal, but they do seem to be increasing at an abnormal rate. So once you'd have one every 10 years, now you have one every couple of years, it would seem. And it seems like it's back in the news again, UFOs, right? So after we allegedly shot down a spy balloon, there were other things that were getting shot down, and I don't know if they were simply, some balloon club's little thing they had floating around. But I know Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana said he was briefed on it. And he said, obviously, whatever these are have been around for a while, and we're just now learning about it. He says, all I can say is lock your door tonight. So he's usually a down-to-earth kind of a person, so I don't know what he's talking about. But I do know, and it's my opinion, that we are being programmed to believe that there are aliens from outer space. And in the days of old, the people were deceived by these alleged gods that came down from the heavens, which we know that they were fallen angels, they were demons. Right? They even had Paul and Barnabas, they even said, oh, you're this God and you're that God, right? I was listening to somebody the day before yesterday, and because a lot of things in our history and archaeological evidence doesn't make sense the way the standard teaching is on it, That's because they got rid of this book. If you bring the book, it all makes sense. He was talking about all this happened. There was some great flood that brought in the ice age. Do tell. And he said, people said these renowned, intelligent beings came and led them into all this stuff. What are you trying to say? Well, they had to be aliens. No, they didn't. Well, maybe, like I said, if we take the Bible to be what it is, there's us, there's the devil and his angels, and there's the Lord and his angels. And I don't see anybody else, right? So I'll set it at that. But I do think people want us to believe there are aliens, and I think that most of the UFO phenomena, and if it is not mistaken, people are seeing things, normal things, and they think there's something else. I think that governments are doing it. I don't think that they're aliens at all. So I think that is going to be a part of the deception that's going to come. That one day when the man of sin arises, his deception is going to be, I'm an intelligent being, I've got wisdom from, I don't know, orc somewhere or whatever. That's speculation on my part, but that's what appears to be. And so when they said their men's hearts failing them for fear of those things which are coming on the earth, could be. Or it could be they're just seeing things happening, and a lot of people are wondering what's going on in this world. And if they didn't have the hope of the gospel, I could see our hearts failing in fear when it's an astrophysicist by the name of Carl Sagan. You may have heard of him. He died without God. And he says, I refuse to believe, he said, in what I cannot see. I've been studying the heavens, and I've never seen God, so how can I believe in a God I've never seen? Yet he was very serious that he believed there was life on other planets. But he's never seen them. So kind of a contradiction in his term there. So he knows the truth now. That's not necessarily a good thing. Debated some atheistic evolutionists, and they reject anything supernatural. They call it your magic daddy in the sky or some kind of sermon. The Bible tells us there'll be scoffers in the last days, so we should just kind of expect it. And so when you get down to the beginning of all things, well, we now know there was a definite time when it began, right? Einstein had to change his view on it. He thought that everything has been going on forever and ever. So there was a definite time. They want to call it a Big Bang or something. We know it all began. So you say, well, how did that happen? Don't know how it happened, but I know for a fact we didn't need a God to do it. How do you know that? They didn't